little, I was kind of interested in architecture. And I think part of it was because we grew up and then, in that time, that neighborhood was like being built. And so there were lots of houses under construction and stuff like that. And like a lot of kids, it was fun to explore like that, like look inside houses under construction. And I became interested in the aesthetics of that and design of that. But I quickly learned, even as a child, that like architecture requires a certain facility and even pleasure in math that I really didn't have. Like, going to the movies was like a thing in our family, and it was something we all enjoyed doing together. So I did get in that habit. But it was this movie called The Poseidon Adventure when I was 9 years old that like I was enthralled by. And I mean, as was the rest of the world, because at the time it was like a huge hit. But it was the first time I think I thought about the storytelling presence behind the camera. And I think it's partly because those movies involved a lot of special effects, because it's about an ocean line, this gigantic ocean liner and a giant wave overturns it capsizes it on New Year's Eve. And so literally the world is turned upside down and the ship is sinking, and it's about they have to like work their way up through this destroyed, now upside down world to try to get up to the bottom and cut their way out. Anyway, I loved it, and it involved miniatures, and so I became very interested in the illusion and how that's done, and then there was just a succession of movies that were like that really caught my imagination, and I think really started making me interested specifically in going into this, particular art of movies and television. So in Hollywood, this happens with actors too. You get what they call typed. And they like if people know you for a certain kind of thing, that's kind of all they see you doing or all they want from you. So I think that that's true of me. I think people, I'm just thought of as like a horror guy, but I'm totally fine with that because I'm enough of a horror fan, legitimately myself, that it's like, okay, that's in my nerdy world, that's cool. That's probably true of most businesses, because most businesses or whatever enterprises that we do as so-called adults, they're generally collective projects where they're team sports where you have to be a team and get along. So yeah, I think a certain amount of social skills is definitely, but particularly in something like film, of course. But I'm a very sociable person, as it turns out. So that I like that. No, I really do. I love that aspect of it. One of the most fun things about doing this, and the older I get, the more thankful I am for it. And I think all of us involved in it, because a lot of us have been doing this together for decades. Me and Jennifer Tilly and Brad Dourif, we've been there from the beginning. And so we just know each other really well. And so it's like, wow, it's that aspect of it, of just like being creative and making art with people you like, it's great. Well, part of it is hiring well, and just like all of the people I'm working with on the show, I like their work. I mean, and they're like-minded. I mean, occasionally you make a mistake And then, but again, that's another conversation. Occasionally you make a mistake, but it's like, it's just important that, you hire the right people. And I think I've been pretty good at that, and also lucky, because luck is definitely part of it. Uh,
Mhm.
I like, for example, our studio and our network, they're very supportive, and
Oh.
they genuinely like what we're doing, and that's not always been my experience, in this business. So I've been really lucky in that regard. But I've definitely been in situations where, like, on the first Child's Play movie, the script was rewritten by the director, and and he changed some
Mhm.
things that, obviously go, what, really?
Mhm.
That's not that, it's like, I didn't do that, everybody.
Yeah.
um, but I've been really lucky in that regard overall too, because all of the other Chucky movies, I've, been the only writer
Mhm.
until now, coming into the TV show, which, it works in a different way, and when I first got into television with the show Hannibal,
Mhm.
it was my first experience in a writer's room, and I loved it. And it was just, what was normally had been for, 25 or whatever years in my career, this very lonely thing, writing. As I mean, it's
Mhm.
hard. I mean, it's lonely, and, you're doing your work alone. I mean, I don't know what you're like, but I have to have,
Mhm.
a pretty high degree of isolation and privacy to do it, because it involves all kinds of, like, pacing and, weird behaviors that are not for public consumption. Like, pulling your hair out and stuff. I forget why I brought that up. Anyway. Yes. The creative process definitely changed, and for the better.
Oh.
Getting into TV was really good for me as a writer, because I had always been, as a movie writer, like a lot of writers, you know, it it's hard, and you can get paralyzed by, fears, and all creative people share this. And this is, like, I think, also part of my job as either a director or a showrunner, particularly in working with actors, because you have to, create an environment where they can feel safe, to do what they do, because it is kind of magical. I mean, to me, I mean, to someone who
Mhm.
doesn't do it and doesn't have that particular talent, it seems like magic to me.
Mhm.
So my process as a writer, used to have a lot of, like, stage fright, about,
Oh,
like,
really?
to the computer. Yeah.
Oh.
But television, cures you of that very, very quickly,
Mhm.
because it is a machine. You're having to write a lot of stuff in a pretty short amount of time. Um,
Mhm.
so being put into that situation, it's like anything. It's like, it's like running or tennis or whatever. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's good to stay in shape. And that's one of the things about being in TV that I like, and that has affected my process, is I'm doing it all the time. And
Mhm.
there is a whole daunting side of that too, because it, like, takes over your life, and it really does. I mean, now, like, we're shooting 6 days a week, 14,
Whoa.
15-hour days.
Whoa.
Um, it's definitely takes over your life. So you have to love it. And
Mhm.
and so and also was, like, working on Hannibal, because I I am as like I had always been a huge fan of that franchise, the books, the movies. I loved them.
Mhm.
And when they turned it into a TV show, I was like skeptical on how is that going to work. And then like I immediately loved it. And I had watched the first two seasons, and I happened to know somebody who worked on it here in Toronto. And I often would like I got in the habit of like usually by email touching base with him, like, oh my god, I loved last night's episode. You guys finally
Mhm.
got into whatever X, Y, and Z characters from the books,
Mhm.
and so we had this fun dialogue going, and he goes, Don, you should be writing on this show. And I was like, well, how would that happen? I mean, because my agent had like I had literally, told him like, put me up for the show, and couldn't get anywhere. And so now my friend who works on it says, you should be writing on it. And so he said, you should talk to Brian Fuller, who was the showrunner, whom I had never met, although he's a pretty well-known guy in Hollywood. And I knew him like on social media a little bit because we were both, gay guys who did horror stuff in Hollywood.
Mhm.
Anyway, so through this friend of mine who worked on Hannibal, I ended up like sending Brian an email saying, I love the show. I'm a huge Hannibal geek. I have such encyclopedic knowledge of it that what is, in my own life can be occasionally embarrassing, could be of great use to you. And so he said, yeah, let's meet. And anyway, it just worked out. And like things like that, they rarely work out in Hollywood. So it worked out. And then I found myself working on season 3, and I just loved it. And I loved, because I was such a fan of the characters, and I thought, like, here's the experience of doing the Hannibal TV show. Every day you go to like an office with a group of like 8 or so other like-minded Hannibal and horror geeks, and we talk about Hannibal all day. You get paid for it. And I was like, oh my God, I would do it for free. Because it was so much fun, just because we loved the characters so much. And so that's when I first started thinking, well, if I could do this with my own franchise and like get because I knew that now there'd been so long, it had been so long, there were all these young writers who, like the executives I told you, loved Chucky. And I said, I could get like Chucky fans work with me on it, and like how much fun will that be, and we'll make it even better. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do it. I wanted to bring in other creative voices, because I knew I was so impressed by how Brian Fuller did that on Hannibal, and how he had created this vision of this world that had already been going for decades in a different way. That was one of the reasons I wanted to do it, and I think it's really worked out well. Is a sound team, a great one, but as showrunner, that's also part of what I do. So they put together, literally, we do it by episode basis. The sound, you do what is called a spotting session. And I go with the sound team, go through an entire episode. Once the episode is locked, which is, we have picture lock, all the editing is finished. So then we do the spotting session with the sound team, and we go through it, and we talk about, is there any dialogue that has to be re-recorded? What are the other sounds? Are we going, and a lot of it is not just like the obvious practical decisions, like, oh, you need to hear the traffic and because that's part of it. But the other just as important part is, what is the atmosphere, the tone you're trying to create? What kind of, because all of these details contribute to the story. What does the wind sound like? Do you want to have, like, if it gets this detail oriented, like how, and things that you would never really notice probably just watching the show, but like have a little like siren happen in the distance, like a police siren in the background after a certain line of dialogue that can accentuate that. It's a really fun process.
Yeah.
So then the sound team puts together all these sounds and we come into the sound mix and you go through the whole episode literally scene by scene and fiddle with the sound and the music score, which is always a big part that I love, because from the time once I even started getting interested in movies, I loved movie music soundtracks. I started collecting another just more film geekery. Yes, it absolutely helped me. I mean, Columbia helped me. I took, as I said, I was an English major there, and I think, just as a writer, it's good to have some at least some formal, academic uh,
True.
knowledge of that field. And I was really interested in literature, so I enjoyed that. And often I do regret not getting my degree and just going the full distance, but I was just so antsy to get into film. And then so after I worked on the soap opera, I transferred to UCLA. I was as a junior, and that there I got to like take screenwriting classes for the first time and film production classes for the first time, and I really loved it. And while I was there, as a student, I wrote the script for the first Chucky,
Mhm.
and and got really lucky, because I like when I wrote it, like my main hopes for it was like, oh, maybe I can get an agent, because that's like kind of the first
Mhm.
hurdle you face as a writer in Hollywood. You need to have representation.
Mhm.
And so I was really lucky with that script. I got an agent, but I also just like got over a lot of other hurdles very quickly.
Mhm.
The script was sold, the movie got made, the movie was a hit. They wanted to do a sequel immediately. We did the sequel immediately. It was a hit. So I was very lucky in that regard. And I sold that script, as you said, like before I graduated, and my mother was not happy about that. Because I said, I like, Mom, I'm just like, I'm starting my career. And she goes, oh, but she just like said, please get your degree. And I like, if I had a kid, I would do exactly the same thing. And by the way, as your uncle, I am officially telling you to get your degree.